We're back with Sean Jordan of StrataPress to talk about working with vendors in a strata. Hi, Sean.
Hello, how are you?
Good. It's great to have you back. This is something that every community goes through, whether they have a manager or don't. And it's something that I know that you've been spending a lot of time on lately. Tell us a
Yes.
little bit more as we get started about StrataPress.
Okay. Well, StrataPress, I was co-founder with StrataPress back years ago, more than 10 years ago, but really got into it about 2017. So my background was in internet technologies, online technologies, produced hundreds of projects for companies around the world. And I was council member. I was a strata council president on three different stratas over like a 15-year period. So I also have my property management license. Once upon a time, I didn't work as a property manager, but I just got it. So I knew what I was doing with properties for private investors. And so I combined all my knowledge and provided a website for our councils to access and our strata owners to get documents and communicate. And that just kind of ballooned up to what we have now, which is kind of a multi platform for a little different audiences: property management companies, strata owners, realtors, lawyers, and notaries, and also self managed stratas. So, we're here to kind of future proof strata management in Canada, make a platform that's continually expanding and growing and finding a wider audience. So that's where we are with StrataPress. And part of that development is creating a vendor marketplace to help, in particular, self-managed stratas and strata managers communicate and work with vendors in a seamless fashion, and also in a fashion that doesn't penalize anybody who doesn't benefit from this. That means we aren't looking to charge membership fees and stuff like that for vendors. We want to get work out in front of them, want them to present proposals to their stratas. So we'll continue working on that as best we can. It's taken a long time because we're getting feedback from all sides about how to best design this.
It's something you
So,
and I are both passionate about, and
yeah,
trying to make sure that the owners in these communities have access to the right vendors, find good value, regardless of what their price sensitivity is, so that they are able to find and work with the right groups that are going to support them.
yeah. So working with vendors, the council is responsible for maintaining the property, and the way council selects, instructs, and communicates with vendors can make a difference between a well-managed project and avoidable problems. So our goal here is to help councils move from reactive decision making to a more organized, confident, and responsible approach to vendor management. So
Fantastic.
starting with the legal duties, um, so like I just mentioned, councils are there to manage common property. So
Right.
when something fails in the building, is the council being reactive, or is the council created a maintenance system that vendors can actually support? So the idea behind this, I'm still on number one. Sorry, I was talking over.
Excellent. Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
It all leads from one end to the next,
It
but
does, yeah. So key points about the legal duty. So strata corporations has the duty to maintain common property. Vendors are often the people carrying out the strata corporation's legal obligations. So poor vendor management can lead to higher cost, owner complaints, insurance issues, safety risks, delays in repairs, things like that. So they shouldn't treat the work as just getting a quote. You kind of have to look at it as a long-term asset management in what you're doing. So identifying which building systems require regular servicing, um, confirming whether the item is common property, limited property, or an owner responsibility, review bylaws before assigning responsibility, and keeping clear maintenance records is a great place to start.
those
And
are
part of that maintenance records, you can use your depreciation report as a planning tool for major components, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming slide.
another good point. It is one of the best leading tools you have. When you look at a strata council and their process for making these decisions, you've covered off the fact that they have this duty to repair and maintain. But a lot of those members on strata councils aren't particularly experienced with managing commercial property like a strata corporation.
No.
So having these processes set up and in place and allowing that to hand off from one strata council to the next as the members rotate, I think is really important. So
Yeah. And there's a slide coming up about keeping a vendors list, and I sent you a sample we can take a look at just to, see what that vendor list looks like and what information it should contain, because that's the kind of thing that can pass from council to council to council, if you have a process in place and everybody has access to what that process is. So
absolutely.
there you go. Build a vendor list before there's an emergency. So one of the biggest mistakes strata councils make is waiting until something breaks before looking for a vendor. In BC, weather events, water egress, ingress, roof issues, elevator problems, plumbing issues, snow and ice, all that stuff can create urgent situations. And a council that's already had trusted vendors in place is in a much stronger position when those issues come up. So, as an example, if a pipe bursts at 9:30 p.m. on a Saturday, does your strata know who to call? Who has the authority to approve the work? And what are the spending limits? So, I created a little vendor list, just a sample one. Covers, the key points on it are, emergency vendor planning should be done before the emergency. It's the point of having this list. Um, Councils should also maintain a preferred vendor list, people they've established relationships with or done work with in the past. And that list should include emergency contacts, after hour numbers, service areas, specialties, things like that. And even have a backup. Identify a backup vendor just in case your preferred vendor isn't available, because they're not always available, especially in emergency. And part of that emergency planning is clarifying who has authority to approve emergency work. So plumbing issues, elevator issues, things like that. Sometimes people go on holidays, council members, maybe it's after hours, but you have to have somebody on council. Everybody should know who's got the authority to approve that emergency work and what kind of budget you're working with. So, the goal is not to have a vendor for everything, but to avoid panic decisions when time matters. So, I don't know. Do you have that list? Is that something you can bring up, or is that
Yeah,
separate?
I do actually.
Just like a little 4-page.
What I'm going to suggest is that we pull it up as our recap because otherwise I'm going to interrupt the
Okay,
flow of this
no problem.
presentation.
We'll take a
But
look at that.
we'll also put that vendor list up as an attachment here for everyone.
Yeah. So define scope. Define the scope of work clearly before asking questions. So many vendor problems begin with vague requests. They don't get enough information. Um, if 3 vendors are asked to quote on slightly different work, council cannot fairly compare the quotes, so they all have to be given the same information. And the thing to consider for yourself, are we comparing 3 quotes, or are we comparing 3 different interpretations of the problem? So if you don't give everybody this specific same information, they're going to see what problem you have and provide solutions and a cost to that solution. So in those cases, you're going to get different solutions because people are going to interpret the problem differently if they're receiving different information. So to be fair to the vendors, you got to make sure that the um, scope of work is clear, describes the problem, the location, the expected outcome of the work, um, access details, cleanup, disposal. If that type of work is required after the repair work's done or any warranty work, things like that. So, and for larger projects, you may even need to go beyond just somebody doing the work. You may need to consult with an engineer first or a consultant, depending on how big the project is. So that's the thing. Vendors can do the work. Sometimes you're going to need an engineer to design a solution and
Absolutely.
implement that. So vague
Sean,
scopes.
you and I have been talking about vendors for a while now, and the different. I'm going to sort of define a bit of a difference. A tender is when you are asking for quotes for a clearly defined scope of work. That allows vendors to come back to you saying, "I will perform the services you've requested for a specific price." And if you've got something that is more fluid or less certain, or it requires some consideration in terms of the scope or the materials being used, then I would say that's more of a request for proposals or an RFP process. And so you've kind of got your choice. Straightforward and simple contracts where you've got a clear scope is a tender. If you're asking for their input on how the project should be scoped and what materials they should use, as in a roof, windows, siding, that sort of a thing, then it's probably more of an RFP.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. That's clear. And I guess more often than not, I'm probably doing the RFP, request for proposal. And what you want to provide to the vendor is answering certain questions. So, what is the problem? Where's the work located? What results are expected? Are photos, reports, drawings, or prior invoices available for this work? Are
Mhm.
permits required?
Yeah.
Is there access restrictions? And is that does that access get cut off to owners and tenants if the work's being done? That has to be communicated with the residents, and that's a big part of this too, is communication with the residents about what work is going on. And of course, when is the completion to be expected, and what's excluded from a quote? Because that can also define, here's what's included, but you also want to make clear or see clearly what's not included with the scope of work or the uh, request for proposal.
Absolutely. You're going to find sometimes that you get what looks like a really cheap quote, but then there's a whole list of extras that you're going to need as part of the total scope of the project.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
even just for awareness.
Yeah. And I'm sure the vendors want to make it look affordable and be competitive and stuff. So the way it's worded, you got to look at the bottom line about, what's ongoing work. Maybe there's some ongoing work that has to be done weeks or months down, after the initial work is done, that type of thing. So
Good point.
we just really scope it out.
Yeah, I mean the emergency situations are quite difficult, aren't they? Because you have less clarity and you have less time. So reactive is clearly putting you as a strata on the back foot. Unsurprisingly, those projects tend to cost quite a bit relative to the work that's being completed. And if you
Yes.
can be proactive about work, it's clearly in your interests. So
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And tackling work, seasonal work, like if you're gonna do roof repairs, do it in the summer, not in the winter.
I think even every roofer would tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's true too.
It is
Wait, you want a
impressive.
new
One of the
roof now?
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the time of year for sure. The roofers are busy.
Yeah.
Um, there are certain tasks that people, have aligned with, seasonality that are expanding slightly thanks to changes in the way people work and technology, like window cleaning. You can have a drone cleaner work, right up into the winter, I suppose, so long as you're not sub-zero.
Yeah.
So, there are some things that are now expanding, but, seasonality is really important for anything relating to your envelope.
Yeah. And maybe that was the point, is you can arrange to have the work done in the winter, like get your quote, get your whatever, but line up the work so that's being done in the spring or summer. You can plan that stuff ahead. You don't have to call because it's like April 1st. Now I got to call my landscaper. Let's get a quote. You can take care of that over winter months and have a starting date for the contract. But and then it doesn't leave it to last minute. And it also might be better to ensure you're getting the vendor that you want to work with and they're not
Absolutely.
booked with doing other jobs.
Yeah. No, that's a great point because they do get busy.
They do. Yeah. And that, especially with something like snow removal. I mean, those snow removal contracts, those companies can only handle so many contracts at once to be realistically able to remove snow in a timely fashion, So you want to be on that list early.
It's a
We
tricky
used,
business, if you're not in a location where you get that certainty of snow. The Lower Mainland last year had, like, basically 0 clearable snow, right? Like,
yeah,
we had nothing, and everyone's looking at their budgets going, "Hey, we paid a quote for this. We had paid, for our snow removal contract, and we didn't even use it." Well, you're paying for it because it is insurance. It's that certainty that you will get cleared when it
exactly.
happens,
Yeah,
and you've gotta make sure that you are not unrealistic about the fact that all of those companies have to have enormous resources, um, physical in terms of having the plows and the snow clearing equipment, when it's necessary, and then having the staff lined up. So there are real costs to providing that insurance, if you will, just for
Yeah.
snow removal, and that's
Yeah.
something that we take for granted in the Lower Mainland because it comes and it goes. Other parts of this province, whether you be in the Okanagan or around Whistler, they have longer winter seasons, and I'm sure it's
A lot
a
more
bit
snow.
different process. Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting because with that one in particular, we used to pay a retainer to keep the snow removal company
yeah,
on their list as a high priority. And part of that
yeah.
service was they came by and salted the parking lot and the driveway when the weather got cold. So they did take care of that type of thing in addition, and that was covered by the retainer. And then if there was ever snow removal required, that was paid after. But we had the retainer. They kept the retainer whether or not they had to remove snow or put out salt. It was just like an insurance thing.
Fantastic.
And that was just a cost. Otherwise it's you don't do that and you're out there with your own shovels or volunteer with it leads to all kinds of other problems. But get
It
on that
does.
list. That one in particular, get on it early, and because that stuff can't wait. So fair, you use a fair and practical quote process. So usually stratas you often hear them say they should get 3 quotes, and that's a useful practice. But it's not always practical or required in every situation.
Mhm.
Um, you can ask yourself when getting 3 quotes, is that good governance? And when does it become an unnecessary delay? Because it's going to take time to get those quotes. So you would do that, the quotes for larger projects, unfamiliar work, stuff you really need to get some feedback with, need discussion. Or if you're testing the market pricing just to see, it's a larger project, there might be a wide range of costs or solutions. But for small, urgent, specialized, or repetitive work, you don't necessarily need 3 quotes. You should
Exactly.
have some
Yeah.
documentation on if you've used that vendor before and how was their work rated. You know, um, when you're getting 3 quotes, you don't always want to choose the cheapest because it's not always the best quote or doesn't have the best value. You got to consider experience, availability, their insurance, warranty they may offer, what safety practices they have in place, ask for references. How do they communicate, with your strata? Maybe they're using, hey, we use WhatsApp or they use this or that. I mean, email only or whatever. So, and are they even familiar with your strata building? Have they worked there before? Have they worked with similar buildings? It depends on the type of work you're asking them to do, but the type of building you're in can matter. Do they have experience with that? Is it a tall building or short? Do they have the necessary equipment to do the work? Those type of things. So the vendor, in talking with them, can help diagnose the problem and say, yes, we can do that type of work, or no, we don't have a ladder that goes up that high, so we can't. Or we have to rent, a boom or something, and that's going to
Mhm.
cost extra.
Yeah.
So checklist on this one: give all the vendors the same information. Make sure the scope is clear. Make sure deadlines are outlined, where exclusions you reviewed, what they won't exclude and should those be included. Make sure they're including their taxes, any costs for additional permits. If there's a cleanup cost after the work's done, is there a warranty and is that included? And, in some cases, there may be some extra work where you have to say, do you have an hourly rate? Because we're going to actually ask you to do this as well after the scope is completed. Ask for hourly rates if there is extras that are required. So
I think
that's
this is fantastic. And I'd say one of the advantages of what you're putting together with your vendor marketplace and what we've talked about internally with zero building services is trying to ensure that you've got the right vendors available for these communities using your experience and ours about who has previously done this work and kind of at what price and value point they typically operate, because you don't want to create a race to the bottom here. You don't want always the cheapest quote. If you've got a landscaper that you have used for many years and you're comfortable with them because they've provided good value for your community, a cheaper quote isn't necessarily the motivation that you want to make a change.
no.
You may find that you're not happy when you make a change purely for price, because, of course, price is what you pay and value is what you get.
Yes.
Good. That's a great one. Thanks, Sean.
Yes, and that actually leads to this, which is, from a strata council's point of view, you're also want to make sure you're dealing with qualified vendors, like you're interviewing them. So, you know, before the vendor is working on site, the council should confirm that the vendor is properly qualified and insured, especially for high risk work like roofing, electrical, plumbing, fire systems, elevators, specialized work, building envelope work, restoration, and like asbestos related work. So you got to find the qualified vendor. You got to make sure they're insured. So what would happen if an uninsured or unqualified vendor caused damage, injured someone, or failed to complete the work properly? So that's what you got to think in to yourself when dealing with the vendors. So
That
you
could
know,
put liability onto the strata and the council. So you
yeah,
definitely want to take this part seriously.
that's right. You want to ask for proof of commercial general liability insurance. You
Mhm.
might need to make sure they have WorkSafe BC clearance, should be considered where applicable. Any fire safety, elevator maintenance, tickets, things like this, electrical, these people all need to be qualified and licensed and ticketed in some cases. So I don't know all the terminology the vendors use, but I've heard that from friends who are like in the electrical business or gas, and they got their ticket, right? They're out there doing their thing. So what you need to
Absolutely.
do, avoid the informal handyman um, agreements, that create safety issues, insurance issues, or liability exposure. So, and avoid recommending friends or family without, if you're going to do that, you got to declare your conflict possibly in that, or you
Don't
know
do that.
don't
Just
do
don't
that. It's probably maybe just best just to avoid recommending friends or family.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Or
if you are on council and you are recommending, you have to abstain from participating in that decision, and just generally, it's better to avoid the conflicts. So,
yeah, exactly.
um, ultimately, you're there to make sure that the building is well maintained and safe, and you don't need to go down that path to get there.
That's right. So that's your checklist. Certificate of insurance, WorkSafe BC status, where applicable. Trade license or certification, references are great. Warranty terms, if there's any warranty, safety plan for higher risk work, written quote on or contract, and then any conflict of interest disclosure. So, and like you said, the vendor, who is cheap but uninsured may become the most expensive vendor the Strata ever hires. So,
Yeah,
want to be
we
careful of that.
we all read about roofers that have workplace accidents. Their health
Those
and
can be
safety is
serious.
compromised,
Yeah,
and that's not acceptable. It's not something you want to happen at your site and in
yeah,
your home. So I think that's a starting point.
that's right. Putting expectations in writing. So vendor relationships feedback I've heard, they break down, and I've seen this because expectations were assumed but never written down, as far as what work needs to be delivered. So councils should be clear about what they expect from vendors, especially from recurring services such as landscaping, cleaning, fire inspection, elevator maintenance, janitorial services, snow removal. So ask yourself, what does good service actually mean? And have you told the vendor so they know what the expectations are in your mind about what's going to be delivered? So write those expectations down to reduce misunderstanding. Um, Service standards should be measurable where possible. Recurring contracts should define frequency, reporting, response time, seasonal requirements, and escalation procedures. And that comes down to put it in writing. Councils should avoid relying on verbal promises from vendors and just have it written down. And those things you want to write down is frequency of the service, areas covered. This would apply a lot to landscaping, seasonal adjustments. Sometimes you'll have, I know with landscaping, I have landscaping services in the winter, but they'll price their services over a year. So you're going to pay for it, but it'll do something different in the winter. They don't do a weekly work, they'll do it on a
Well, do
monthly
snow
basis.
removal.
Snow removal, that kind of stuff. They might do that, yeah. So just be aware of what the expectation is on the service schedule, and getting reporting on a regular basis about how the work's going. You might want to do some photos before and after work were useful because if you're not working with a property management company and the vendor does the work, somebody has to go inspect it. Somebody has to go take a look. And I know council members may not necessarily know what they're looking at. So they may want to get somebody else to come in and double check the work, especially if it's something very important. And I'm thinking wiring, electrical stuff in the ceiling in particular, stuff that isn't seen
Yeah.
except by the vendor. So you want to make
Yeah.
sure that the work is being inspected. And a property manager would probably do that for you after the work's done. Maybe not always, but we always inspected the work. And if we didn't know what we were looking at, you can get another person in who's from the same industry to take a look at the work and make sure it's all done properly.
That's true. You
Yeah,
talked about service standards, and it's important to understand that those can vary greatly between communities, right? Like there are some that would like, documented time of arrival and departure
right.
for certain staff, whether that be landscaping, janitorial, concierge, whatever the line is. There are
Yeah,
others who would like to see pictures on completion recorded with a log of what work was completed on each visit. There are others where so long as the landscaping looks good, they don't mind.
yeah,
So you are going to pay a premium if you want more service, if they're consuming time to take logs and make better notes or using expensive software to help them do that, because there are some custom tools that can be utilized. Um, but important to have that expectation, as this slide is all about, very clear between both parties so that you reduce the likelihood of misunderstandings.
right. And we'll pick on landscapers because they're the most visible, I guess, around a strata property, and they're the most kind of regular. People see them out there mowing the lawn, working on the landscaping and the gardening and stuff like that. And so when it's not mowed, or it's maybe a little later this week or that week, or something gets missed, everybody seems to notice because it's landscaping. Everybody can see it. So
Mhm.
a good example is for landscaping, maintain the grounds is too vague. The better expectation would include mowing frequency, pruning schedule, irrigation checks, leaf removals, snow and ice responsibilities if it's applicable, reporting any damaged plants and identifying drainage concerns. So if your landscaper is providing that kind of transparency, that's what you want. And it's all recorded and it's all accounted for. And it doesn't come back to the landscaper saying, well, we're just maintaining the grounds, like you said. We don't know what that means. What is it? Maintain the grounds? It's too vague. So you want to have some real deliverables there.
Very clear deliverables, and in line with those deliverables is having a dedicated point of
Hmm.
contact for each vendor so that they know who it is that they're responsible for. The problems that we hear about from vendors are they've agreed on a certain scope and contract, and then an owner comes up to them and says, "Oh, can you trim this tree?"
Oh, wow, you're
Well,
here.
the arborist service doesn't happen or is not included in that contract except for whatever's delineated. Like there might be a spring service or a fall service.
Right.
So you can't have owners giving separate instructions to those that are executing the work. You've got to have that single point of contact work with the vendor to bring up anything that is a potential concern and ensure that you've got the right communication channel.
Right. And vendors, they can become quickly frustrated when several council members or owners or tenants and the property manager all giving them different instructions. So it just causes confusion, leads to extra costs and inconsistent results. So what you want to answer is who is allowed to instruct the vendor, and does the vendor know that?
Yeah.
That's important. So vendors should receive direction from one authorized contact. And I know this just from dealing with stratas myself directly, even property management companies. It's much easier for me to help them when I have a single point of contact. So that I'm not wondering like who should I talk to, and then they forward it to somebody else and this and that. But for a vendor, it's very important for them to understand who's providing instruction, and they're the ones they should be talking to. So one authorized contact. It could be the strata manager, council liaison, building manager, whatever wants, but decide on that internally before instructions are sent to the vendor. And yeah, one owner should report concerns through the proper channels, not directly to vendors. So if they have an issue with what's going on, they need to talk to a council member about it, not directly with the vendor. Um, and then you should tell your vendor that not to accept instructions from unauthorized individuals. So keep it straightforward, name the authorized contact, define spending limits, define who approves extras on the spending, use written instructions, not verbal, keep council copied and track open items, and record decisions in the minutes of your meetings. So those are some of the tips. Uh, it's a communication thing, which most of this really comes down to is communication, whether you're writing out the scope of work or the request for proposal or dealing with the vendor on site. It's all communication's a big part of it and who you should talk to.
Very much so. I think that's great.
Yeah. There you go. Manage communication with owners before, during, and after vendor work. So you want to make sure your owners are aware of the work that's going on because the vendors are going to take the brunt of any kind of upset strata owner who wasn't aware that the lobby's closed for noisy work, or it might be the fact that water shut off, elevators are disrupted, parking is restricted, your balcony access is restricted, security access. I mean, all this stuff can create real complaints if communication is poor. So as a strata council, you got to ask yourself, do owners get enough notice to cooperate? Or do they only hear about the vendor work when it inconveniences them?
Yeah.
So communication problems are the root of most of it. You got to make sure your owners are aware of the work that's being done, well in advance, especially if it's a major project. Keep them in the loop. Don't overpromise or compromise completion dates. There might be weather delays, supply chain delays, even your engineers, maybe their accessibility is restricted. Maybe they're busy. So you want to keep everybody up to date on changes as well. So best idea is communication should be centralized either through a portal you can communicate with the owners through, or somewhere where all the owners, a posting board or somewhere else, the parkade or elevator where most of your owners will see that information. And just outline to them what work's being done. Why is it being done? When will it happen? Which areas will be affected? What do residents need to know? Is suite access required? Will water, power, elevators, anything like that be interrupted? And if there's a problem, who should the residents contact? So these are all the issues you got to kind of think about when doing a major project. This could be including stuff that takes days: painting, roofing, plumbing work, balcony work if it's being done across all the balconies, parkade
Yeah.
membrane work, things like that.
Because a lot of that can be very disruptive.
Yeah,
There are things where a single notice is all that's required. You've got an exterior window cleaning service happening on a certain date. As a courtesy, you're letting your ownership group know. And then there are those that you're describing here where they're going to be impacted. They could lose supply of water. They could find themselves without power or access. Those disruptive works really need multiple points of communication and collaboration
that's right.
between those that are organizing the work and those that are going to be affected by it.
Yeah, especially like elevators. If somebody's on a high floor who has mobility issues, it requires an elevator, and then one day it's out of service. Yeah, if it's emergency, that's different. But if it's a planned maintenance, everybody should be aware
Good
so they
point.
can make arrangements.
Good point. And again, communication transparency helps to build trust, and
Yeah,
that makes it easier for your owners and for your vendors to get through a project, big or small.
right. So number 9, use the depreciation report to move from reactive repairs to planned vendor management. So the depreciation report is not just a document for the AGM package. It's a planning tool that helps stratas prepare for repair, maintenance, and renewal of common property and assets over a 25 or 30-year period. So, and all stratas over 5 units must obtain a depreciation report now. So,
Yes.
is the depreciation report just sitting in a folder, or is your council using it to plan vendor work? So, it can be used. Council should identify upcoming projects before they become urgent. You can do that with the depreciation report. Some of the major components in a depreciation report may require specialized consultants before you work with a contractor. So you got to consider that. It's more of a long-term planning thing. And if with the long-term planning helps avoid rush decisions, because we know from start to finish with a depreciation report could, 6 months to a year from when it's like, we need to get one, you vote on it, allocate a budget, pick a company that's going to provide you a quote and do all that stuff. And then the actual engineering work and the putting the report together takes time as well. So long-term planning with this one, but it also helps map out what you could be doing over the next 5 years, not just over the next 6 months. So,
True.
um, yeah, it should be reviewed. The report should be reviewed annually by council, not just every 5 years. You should look at it a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and then the maintenance
The engineers
history.
don't have a crystal ball. Like, they did not know exactly when there was going to be a problem, but they are very good at using their actuarial numbers and predictions, and their experience to map out the approximate timing and cost for you. So if you've got something in your depreciation report over the next 5 years, this is something that you as a strata council, together with your manager, if you have one, should be discussing with the depreciation report author and ensuring that the work that's within that tactical horizon is planned and not just a theoretical. Beyond 5 years, the life expectancy of any given capital asset could vary. And in that 5 year horizon, it's highly likely that you're going to be able to map something out. And that's a great guideline for you. So, from what I've heard from the engineers and what I hear from those obviously on Strata Council and working in Strata management, um, the more advanced you are, the more prepared you are to take advantage of the guidance that you've been given here, the smoother it's all going to go for your ownership group.
Right. And the depreciation report will actually working with your budget. It'll help you plan these events better. These maintenance and repairs and working with vendors. So a strong vendor strategy connects your annual budget, your contingency reserve fund planning, your depreciation report. Take a look at your maintenance calendar and then just make sure you're communicating all that to the owners. But having that working together, depreciation report, your budgets, your contingency reserve fund, you can plan for the costs ahead of time as well as the work that's required from the vendor. So, and also keep track of the history of work that was done that relates specifically to the depreciation report. So the work's been done and the depreciation report's been followed, because you're not always going to be on council. So the next council needs to know, oh, looking at depreciation report, we need to do this. Well, they might be looking at something that was already done. Maybe if they're new to the building. So you want to make sure you have a good maintenance record to compare with your depreciation report.
Good point. And your depreciation report author is going to want to see that when they do their update as well.
Right.
So those
Which
logs are important.
that's a good point, because they do have to update it. So they will update it with that, all those things considered. So
Just for everyone's knowledge in BC, as of July 2026, every strata over 5 units has to have a depreciation report that is 5 years or less old in the Lower Mainland and Capital Region District. And outside of those areas, the rest of BC, it's July 2027. So everyone should be on this 5 year cycle. I have it on good authority from several engineers that many stratas are not going to meet the deadline. But hopefully they've got it queued up or in progress. If you haven't, do it now. You are too late. And this is going to start to impact your ownership group because when you attempt to have a resale in that unit, the buyer is going to be expecting that document to be available. It is required now. So just a couple of extra notes given the timeliness of this topic.
yeah, true.
Absolutely. Okay. And finally,
As mentioned earlier, review performance, document problems, and know when to change vendors. So vendor management doesn't end when the invoice is paid. The council should regularly review whether the vendors they're working with are meeting their expectations. So keep your good vendors, retain them, treat them professionally, and those with poor performance, should be addressed early. Documented if there's problems with the work they're doing, especially if it's that repeated work, like tends to happen with my experience with landscaping and janitorial work, it always starts out excellent, but over, after a year or so, things start getting missed, things start getting skipped. So you have to review these and you have to talk to your vendor about the work that's being done. They might have brought on a new employee who's doing the janitorial work. Maybe they don't know what's supposed to be done exactly. Maybe they're missing stuff. Um, and it just takes a minute to walk down the stairs, look at where the work's being done, see if it's being done, make sure it's being done. Because then if you just ignore it and go, okay, well, the year's come up, let's just renew this, that's not a great approach. That's coming down to, are we managing vendor performance, or are we simply renewing contracts? Because that's what the strat has always done. So you want to look at the work being done and make sure that it's meeting your expectations. So, and you can distinguish between a one-time mistake and a pattern of poor performance,
Good
just
point.
by doing inspection. 1 week, okay, well, they missed this stairwell this week. I won't make a deal about it. Come back next week. Is it done? Or maybe it's not done. Now it's been 3 weeks. So you want to make sure you're not calling them impulsively and in changing or scope of the work and things like that. You want to make sure that, hey, I have some real issues with the work that's being skipped.
And in fairness, not every task needs doing every week. Windows need
No.
doing every so often, dusting needs doing every so often.
Right.
Stairwells are probably a less frequent activity than cleaning the lobbies and hallways.
Right.
Um, but you want to make sure that you are monitoring it and not allowing a lack of performance to turn into a future dispute or to allow owners to get frustrated with things.
Right.
There is somebody is going to notice,
Yes.
and you want to make sure that you've got vendors that are responsive and upholding their end of the contract.
Right. And you can, check it yourself if you're on council. Just take a walk around the property or take a look at the landscaping. Here's the practical checklist. Was the work completed as agreed? If there's a problem, was the vendor responsive? You want to make sure that you're being charged properly. So make sure you're checking the invoices as well, not just the work, but are they charging you as agreed upon? Or are they adding more or less? What extras are being approved before being charged? Things like that. W- that's, yeah, comes down to
No.
communication again.
If someone is curious about the performance, the cost of a vendor, Eli Report has a special annual benchmark report tool for Strata Council members and for Strata managers that will benchmark these things for them and give them a scorecard for their community and help them see where they may be paying more than their closest peers for certain work. And so, if you are in a position where you're not sure whether you're getting value or you want to evaluate your strata and how it looks, that tool is available to you. You can join us at Eli Report and request one on your checkout if you are a Strata Council member or a Strata manager.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's just something that relates to this when to change vendors that might help you think about whether or not you're getting value.
Right. And to look like the hero on council, if your council has to show owners how it's selected, instructed, supervised, and reviewed vendor work, do your records clearly tell the story? And is it a reasonable story? Because owners are going to want to know. If you chose this vendor and things went sideways, how did we get to this point? Or we chose this vendor and things were fantastic. How did you get to that point? Just document that kind of process with each of your vendors, keep track of the work they're doing, and review their contracts on a regular basis if it's not just a one off. And where services or projects are much larger, consider that you might have to consult an engineer or somebody who specializes in that type of repair or work being done before hiring a vendor to actually do the work. So, those are my practical tips.
I love those tips. Those are good ones, Sean.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. I know that you've got some tooling for vendors coming. Anyone that's interested in getting to learn more about StrataPress, go to stratapress.com and book a meeting with Sean. There's the
Yes.
URL on your screen
Tell you
now.
all about it. Walk you through
There you
everything
go.
we got.
all about it.
Yeah,
So there are a few other things that I'd like to kind of cover with you today. You had mentioned having a sample vendors list, so I'm going to bring that one up for everyone's benefit now,
great.
and we'll be able to have a look at what you've set out for them there. So
So
here
this was
is
just to give you an idea of what a list you should have in your document folder or in a welcome package for new council members. But this just outlines the key things they should need to know about working with vendors, especially in emergency situations. You already outline all these things that people need to know.
yeah,
Who's your contact? What's their role? What's the notification requirements? In addition to this, you could add the actual contact information for those council members and keep that updated, or refer
certainly.
to wherever that information's kept for your strata corporation. But this was just, I think there's 4 pages here. So there's your emergency approval authority, who can authorize approvals in an emergency situation. How much can they spend in those situations? What's authorized ahead of time. Your vendor list, just to show you, like, okay, here's our preferred vendor list. These are the people we worked with in the past. This is on paper, but with StrataPress, we're building this to be part of the portal, so it can be shared by multiple people, or turn over in council. But this is the information that you want to track. Put
Yeah,
in some notes about them. Who's your backup service if your preferred vendor isn't available? Who's your emergency contacts? Things like that. So that just gives you an idea what your list should look like. Another page here, just more vendors, electrical
yeah. More of those
contractors,
different
more of the
categories. Yeah,
things. Yeah. And then a process for emergencies. So identifying the issue and who should be contacted, who's the preferred vendor in these emergency situations, and what record should be kept
yeah,
for future councils about this particular situation. And then a council checklist there as well. So I'm going to make a blog post about this entire topic, and I'll put up a sample checklist like this on that post once it's published. But
great.
that was just to give you an idea. Like, you should have a document ahead of time. It's easy to put one together and identify who's your emergency contacts and who's your preferred vendors and who has authorization to get the work done and what's their maximum budget in an emergency.
Yeah.
So, and I just wanted to share that.
Perfect. Thanks for doing that, Sean. I think it's important for everyone to be prepared and to have that type of a list together.
Mhm.
And we're looking forward to seeing how that all comes together within the StrataPress framework for
Yeah,
all the
enter
communities that you
marketplace.
serve.
It's going to be great and
Thanks,
useful
Sean.
for
Have a
everybody.
great day.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, see you again.